Welcome to the Art Lab podcast. I'm Rabbi Josh. This week is a new episode with the artist David Rosman, about whom I'll tell you a little about in a minute. But I wanted to say that this season we are doing about one new episode every month, and we are doing greatest hits from the past for the rest of the weeks. The reason for that is we're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work on Art Lab, trying to shore up our programs and make it sustainable. In the meantime, if you like this podcast and you value the work of Art Lab, please go to artlabpdx.org/donate so you can support the work that we do. And there you can also find out more about what else we do besides the podcast, which is quite a bit and quite amazing. In this episode, I sit down with multi-instrumentalist David Rosman, guitarist, violinist, and Klezmer devotee, to talk about how he found his way into Klezmer music through a winding path. John Zorn's avant-garde Jewish compositions was part of his background, a deep dive into Zohar and Jewish mysticism, which is always one of my favorite things to talk about, and an eventual hunger for community that led David back to tradition. We discussed what appropriate innovation looks like inside a musical tradition whose continuity was violently severed. We talk about the poorer, older, more melancholic wedding band repertoire he drew on for his latest album, which you can find on Bandcamp. Check the show notes. We talk about the push and pull of rhythmic elasticity we compare to Charles Mingus, and the influence of ethnographer S4E6, who saw preserving Jewish folk tradition as inseparable from creating something new with it. And he's been an inspiration to David. It's a conversation about grounding innovation in real fluency with tradition rather than skipping straight to reinvention. This is one of those conversations, therefore, that's about art, but is simultaneously about being Jewish and finding that perfect meeting place between tradition and vitality. David is a recent Art Lab alum, having been part of our fourth cohort. It was a deep conversation that I enjoyed a lot. I think you will too. Here's David Rosman. David Rosman, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You are a very musical, multi-instrumentalist guy. What's your main instrument, or do you not have one? You teach drums, you teach guitar, you do all kinds of things.
It's been my primary for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, but guitar is really the one that I spent the most time with. It's the only one I got any kind of formal instruction on. So I usually say guitar is my primary, but violin is what I've been focused on for the last 5 years or so.
And guitar is traditionally not part of Klezmer, and violin traditionally is. Is that accurate or not accurate?
Yeah. It really, violin was something I wanted to get back into, and I started teaching, and so I started studying it a little bit at some point. And I always associated klezmer with clarinet in my head. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. And then at some point, I don't know how it happened, but I found like a klezmer fiddle tutorial online. And I was like, oh, this is great. And then I started studying about the history of klezmer, and then fiddle was the main instrument traditionally. Clarinet was a later development. So anyways, violin just became my klezmer instruments. And then I got deep into klezmer, and I've learned from like classical pedagogy and stuff like that. But really my focus has been klezmer, violin is really what I'm into.
I'm going to assume that you did not grow up listening to klezmer, which was not the dominant mode of popular music when we grew up.
Yeah, it was very peripheral. Like I knew some of the stuff from the temple or whatever. And I had a sense of the tonality. I'd heard it here and there. My good friend, his uncle, Alan Byrne, was like a major klezmer guy. He was in this band, or started this band, Brave Old World. And so I heard their stuff at a pretty young age. And we were into like rock music, experimental music, but we both just thought it was super cool. We didn't dig deep into it, but there was this understanding that there was something cool about it. And then I got into this guy, John Zorn, and he was very kind of self-identified as like a Jewish composer. And I just liked his really aggressive, noisy. I just identified him as this just very avant-garde punk rock kind of guy. So once he just gave me this idea that there could be something cool about Jewish music. I didn't know exactly what it was, but he made it kosher for me, like as a teenager.
John Zorn, for people listening who don't know, aggressive, to my ears, somewhat atonal, very experimental, avant-garde, and a lot of work that's like explicitly Jewish in some way.
Yeah. So it opens up the question of what's Jewish about this. So it got me thinking about it a little bit. It was, and it got me to learn the modes and write a little bit in that. So to me, I was making like Klezmer music. Klezmer, it wasn't really Klezmer, but it was mostly inspired by John Zorn's like Jewish, like Masada stuff. So I learned how to play it on guitar. But it wasn't until later I actually started getting really into like Jewish studies, I would describe it. I was really interested in the stories from the Torah specifically, and learning about biblical criticism, like the history of the development of the Jewish Bible. And then I was getting into like studying the Zohar and Jewish mysticism. And I was getting into all this stuff. And at a certain point, I just realized I didn't have anyone to share it with. I didn't know other people who were interested in it. And at some point, it occurred to me that I'm like such a music guy. I'm like, maybe I should just get into Jewish music and maybe that'll help me connect more. And so I started reading about Klezmer. It was something I like forced myself into as an experiment.
Interesting. So you were interested in Brave Old World. So your road into Klezmer was not like, oh, my parents or my grandparents had these old classical Klezmer records. Your way in was through a couple of iterations out, but stuff that probably has a thread in Klezmer. And so that was, and then your other road in was you're just interested in Jewish ideas. What made you want to learn about biblical criticism in the Zohar? Did you come from a Jewish family that was kind of intellectually curious?
No, I don't know why. I was the only one who was into it. Same with music. I was the only one in my family who was into it, and I just got interested in it in a very deep way. I just couldn't get enough of it. But it was disconnected from any kind of community. Like I said, I didn't have friends who were into it. And yeah, when you start learning about stuff, you want to share and learn with other people and talk about it. And then I got into Jewish mysticism first from the mysticism side, but then once I found the Zohar, I was more just interested in it as just philosophy, literature, the history side of it. And there was just so much there. It was so interesting to me. And and it really was at a certain point, I self-consciously swerved into music because I was like, this is just getting lonely out here. I don't know anyone who's into it.
And music is necessarily communal. So wait, at the risk of putting you on the spot, can you name something or identify or remember something that resonated with you in the Zohar, like a teaching or just at a high level, something that you remember loving?
Yeah, a lot. But what I really like about the Zohar is how subversive it could turn a quote from the Torah around and warp its meaning, yet somehow still rely on the authority of these scholars or historical figures. So one of my favorite images has always been this idea of innovations in Torah. Like this idea that humans, like we can find new meanings in Torah. I say we, I don't think I would be able to do it. And if they are worthy, they'll rise up to a higher level and God delights in them. But not only does God delight in them, they get reworked into the fabric of reality. And to me, this was a really good way of breaking down this kind of straitjacket of like the Torah is the universe and everything's predestined. It's like breathe some like free will into it. this intellectual curiosity, like if we're good enough, worthy enough, we can actually change the like fundamental reality that
Yeah,
creates this.
and what I love that too. I think that's such a beautiful insight into what makes the Jewish tradition so incredible, is that it is, and I've been thinking a lot about this recently. We balance between these two things that are absolutely essential and pull in different directions. One is our attachment towards structures that have been handed down and traditions that have been handed down and fealty to what happened generations before us. And then on the other hand, radical rereadings, literally and figuratively, of the Jewish past, and
Yeah.
the reinterpretations, the reconstitution of these old ideas. The tradition has such love for that they're not even, if something, I forgot how you put it, but if the idea is meritorious and strong enough so that it becomes part of the canon, so to speak, over time, it's viewed not as an innovation. Traditionally, it's viewed as, oh, you uncovered something that was hidden in there.
I love that there's some sort of, I think of it as like a Jewish inventiveness that's come out of this commitment to the Torah being the word of God. So you're forced to accept that. And then like, how can we keep reinventing it to keep it at the center, but survive changing conditions or whatever. But yeah, there's something so, I don't know. It's a challenging text to read, and I love just I don't know, when you get little things that jump out at you, just these little pockets of just revelation and light and just poetry that just jump out. And
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Were you reading it in the original Hebrew/Aramaic, or were you reading in English?
just the Pritzker edition, the Daniel Mount translation, and the notes, his like commentary, his notes. Without that, like I had read bits of it before, like the Gershom Sholem, where he just wrote it with no explanation. And I'd read a lot about the Zohar, but yeah, without his notes, I don't think I would have gotten too deep into it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have
I'm
always.
just in English.
Yeah, it's so beautifully printed, and yeah, I love that edition. I always feel like he won the Jewish learning lottery. He was just so into the Zohar that he translated it, and then somebody was like, "Here's an enormous sum of money. Please just keep doing
Yeah.
this." But do you see an analogy between? I know I cut you off, so we can circle back, but it feels to me like there's something very musical in the way that you just described what you love about the Zohar. It seems like at the least there's an analogy to what a musician is doing to and what musicians do. Just for example, you just identified John Zorn. So in some ways that's something that's comes from some tradition. Maybe he's the wrong example. Maybe Brave Old World is a better example. But he's also doing something radically new. And I feel like jazz musicians are always reinventing the standards in really profound ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Specifically with Klezmer, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I would consider appropriate innovation before breaking what I think of as traditional klezmer music. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about it and just wondering what can be done with it. But klezmer is such a unique historical situation in that like the continuity of it got so abruptly severed. Um, so it's weird, but yeah, I do think of it in terms of not specifically the Zohar, but just Judaism in general. It's like, how do you keep something like that vital while staying true to what it really is? And what is that relationship? I think of it as like there's this membrane where you bring in things from the outside, but there's this sense of otherness that you're trying to preserve, and just tweaking that, what you can bring in and what you keep out.
Meaning the you want to keep it. So on the one hand, if I'm understanding you, on the one hand, you want to be open to influences that don't necessarily come from the tradition. But on the
Right.
other hand, you want to keep it distinct and, as you said, keep the otherness. That is, keep the Jewish soul of it while remaining open and porous.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was younger, I would just write whatever style of music I liked, it used the jazz structure where I would take a melody that to me sounded klezmer-ish, using the modes, and then we'd improvise on it and play it in like an aggressive kind of jazz rock style, and then close it with the melody again. I'm like, it's a klezmer song. And to me, that was enough. And then now that I've learned more, actually gotten into the actual genre, that's not even remotely, I wouldn't call that klezmer at all. And so now I'm way more working with traditional melodies. But how can you, I don't know. I could go on a lot about it. Klezmer is interesting because historically it was a very innovative genre. It was already eating up tons of different styles of music. And there was a big, really valued original composition. So each little klezmer band, each klezmer leader would write tons of their own music, and they wouldn't become traditional until long after they died. But now, looking back on it after 100 years plus before this, since this genre has been vital, it's hard to know how can you keep innovating it now that you're picking up the pieces and looking backwards. And that's one of the things, one of the first things you asked me about, like learning new tunes. It is really helpful to hear different versions of the same tune and to see how they're morphing around, and you can see what's essential and what's elastic. And that's one of the things that I'm comfortable doing, is learn some kind of rules about how to play with the tune.
By the way, I just want to note what I love about this about this conversation is that if somebody just jumped in, they might think we're talking about Jewish tradition writ large, and the challenge of being a Jew, just in general, is finding ways that we navigate so it's relevant and alive in the 21st century, but it's not completely disrupted from tradition. So it sounds like when you were first learning about it, as you now look back on your earlier klezmer innovations, you feel like it was maybe inauthentic. You were just kind of like tacking on a klezmer intro and closing, and in between you were just kind of doing something that was not rooted in the tradition. And now you're trying to find ways to innovate that are more honest to the tradition.
I think at first it was just an exotic kind of color to add to what I was already doing. Mm-hmm. And now it's actually something I'm legitimately interested in, and it's a question to think about when I'm making stuff, and I'm like committed to it.
Yeah. So let's talk about your most recent album, this collection of tunes, and through that lens, if we can. Is it an innovative album, or is this one where you see yourself as just really trying to root yourself fully in the tradition? How would you talk about that balance in light of these tracks that you put down?
Yeah, it's hard to explain. And it was this question of like how to incorporate technology was something I thought about and I've experimented with. And on this album, I did it mostly by myself, one track at a time, using a computer. And it was very far from the feeling of like jamming a klezmer tune. And I never came up with a satisfying kind of game plan of how I was going to utilize technology and how I wasn't. But what I did is I just started doing it and just going off of what felt right, because intellectually I'd never figured it out. But what I did figure out is that when I play it right, I can feel something. And if I just focus on that, then I'll be happy.
Can you walk us through, like, in what ways were you, as you played and recorded, were you trying to just have fidelity to the traditional structures, or were you trying to do stuff that was innovative, not in the recording technology, but in the playing, in the scales or whatever it might have been, the notes chosen?
Yeah. So this one I stuck really with traditional melodies, and I veered a little bit off the beaten path of like what is commonly heard in the repertoire in the United States. So I ended up settling, I called it the fidl-pauk-kapelye, which means like the the fiddle drum butt bands. And that's what they would call kind of the apprentice level band that they would send out for poor people's weddings who couldn't afford to pay anything. Um, and not only was it apprentice level playing, but they would play older, more depressing music than the rich people would get. So basically, if you had more money, you would get more contemporary music, happier sounding music, better playing, and a wider range of instruments. And if you were poor, you would just get some really drony, depressing, really old, archaic sounding music for the most part. And the wedding guests would have to pay per song. So I thought that was really funny. And I focused for the most part on some of the oldest written tunes I could find that had that kind of sounds to it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like the depressing stuff. I
Yeah.
think a lot of players do, and the listeners don't like it as much, but the players tend to like the dramatic kind of dark sounding stuff more than the really silly freilachs that are really jumpy and cartoony.
Tell me, why is it that the like B-list musicians tended to stick to that stuff? Is because that's what kind of, that was the first stuff anybody would learn? Yeah, how did that play out?
See, I'm getting this information from Walter Zev Feldman's book. It's called Klezmer Memory History. This is where I first heard about this concept of, like the happier sounding music like was for rich people, and poor people got like dronier, more archaic music. Now, I don't know how rigid that really was. I've only heard that there before. I don't know that much about it, but he gives a couple examples. There's this whole repertoire that isn't really played anymore that was pretty important for klezmer musicians, which was music to accompany marching, like marching from one place to another. That was a lot of the repertoire because there were a lot of things that happened in this 3 to 7 day wedding like ceremony where the groom would be marching to the village of the bride, and then they would go to the rabbi's house, and then they would go to the in-laws house, and they would go from here to here and here, and there was a type of music that accompanied it. Now, in American klezmer music, which kind of was what was documented, what we think of as klezmer, it didn't have any purpose for this type of music. It didn't serve any kind of function. So what we hear now is the dance music, the lively dance tunes. So I tried to find some of these tunes, and it was something that was interesting to me.
There's a really beautiful, what I would say, a beautiful looseness to the music on this last album. Do you know what I mean by that? It doesn't, I think first of all, do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. Part of it is a preference of mine, and then part of it is just a byproduct of how I recorded it, probably, but a lot of it is, even when I do play with the group, there is this push and pull between the members of rushing, and then coming together on the downbeat. I really like that kind of push and pull.
When I heard you live at the Art Lab exhibition, I think I told you the next day that to me it sounded like Mingus. If you listen to Mingus recordings, you can hear, to my untrained, I don't have like a musician's vocabulary, but you can hear at the core of it a beautiful composition, but you also hear a little bit of people venturing out and then coming back to the whole. And I'm wondering if that's what you were going for, either live or in recording.
Yeah. Mingus, it would be something I would aspire to in a future album. Like what I think of as Mingus, it's like he was able to take blues, maybe like gospel, like the really intense kind of immediacy of the sound of it, and then frame it in a really sophisticated classical and jazz meta structure that had nothing to do with where the the really intense stuff comes from. I don't know, to be able to mix those two things together is amazing. And I'm nowhere near that in my experiments with klezmer. But yeah, one thing so there's a subgenre called the jach or the hora, which is like a triplet beat, like boom, boom, boom. And it's a dance style. But in Jewish music, it can be really slowed down, or at least I like to play it slow and be really dramatic, almost like a tango or something. But that one in particular, and I've talked to other people about this, there's a sensibility that I think of in terms of funk music where everybody's on the downbeat, boom. And then you either have one or two measures to kind of branch out, and then boom, you're back on the downbeat.
Yes, there's
And
like an elasticity.
yeah, and I love that. It keeps things interesting, and I think klezmer, not just rhythmically, but even melodically, there's a lot of leeway embedded into it. Like there's like stock cadences or ways to end a phrase, and it's super fun when you have two melody players and they're playing the melody and then they do two different cadences at the same time. Like stuff like
Yes.
that. It's a lot of it to me is all permitted, and you can hear two people playing off of each other at the same time. It's super fun.
Earlier, you were talking about the challenge of, on the one hand, preserving the Jewishness, and on the other hand, being open to other influences. And it sounds like maybe on this album you were less concerned with the other influences. But what are the other influences that find their ways into your klezmer playing?
What I realized after playing it for a while is that I could put a lot of my sensibilities just into the violin playing, just in the moment while playing a traditional melody. Like I think a lot of my electric guitar playing has informed the way I play the violin. And my mood in the moment, I can be like really aggressive. I can be really, and then you could be really heavy and then be really silly right after that. Just like drastic mood swings. And you can do that without changing the tune at all. And without changing the structure. That's what I realized is I pack my whole musical upbringing, my whole history into it without it sounding like a weird jazz, rock, metal, electronic fusion, whatever it is. I could put all that stuff just into my playing, and it feels right to me, whether or not that comes across, but it feels,
I see. It's the tone and the expression.
yeah, I feel like I can talk to people in the same way. And actually with violin, it's way more immediate because there's no technology in between. It's just, that's what I really like about it. So I feel like I can be more fluid and spontaneous with what I'm feeling without it even being an original composition, which I had no experience with that before Klezmer. I always was into original music. And then this was just the total opposite, just being really focused on the traditional side of it. And then I was surprised to find that it felt the same.
Yeah. So it's so wait, your last album was just you on multi-tracks?
So yeah, but I did have some guests. I had Yankel Falk play the clarinet on a couple tunes. My friend Ross Fish, who I think you know, played the Jews harp, the boing that thing. And then Paul Beck played the cymbalum on 2 tracks. So yeah, I had people who could play stuff that I didn't know how to play. But other than that, I just did guitar, percussion, 2 violins, and that's mostly all that's on there.
But you weren't playing as a group. It was not a live recording, so to speak. It was people playing on individual
tracks. Yeah, I did it one
tracks.
track, and that just had to do. That's not what I wanted, but I didn't have time to really rehearse with a band, and it was just out of necessity. I just started doing it 1 track at a time.
Do you have another album coming down the pike, or where do you want to head as a musician? That's one question I have.
What I've wanted to do for a while is I wanted to get this idea documented of like what I consider the traditional sounds before I like really experiment with it too much. And I feel like I'm close to getting down what I wanted. And I would love to one day work like what I was saying about Mingus, take what I think of as klezmer and work it into a bigger structure that has a little bit more of my, I don't know. So yeah, it's something I've thought about. I think he would be a really good model to work off of because I love how he expanded the language of just like really intense blues.
But I love the fact that you are rooting yourself so solidly. Your idea of innovation is very grounded first in tradition. And I think that is so powerful because I think that going back to the larger conversation about Judaism, I think that the Jewish past can give rise to all kinds of innovation, ritually, in terms of teaching and in Torah insights. It has to speak to our moment in the 21st century or whenever we're living. But I think a lot of people want to go right to that without really rooting themselves in the tradition. And I think that it's
Yeah.
richest and works best, whether it's music or religion, if you have a really deep founding in the tradition itself and then begin to reach out.
Yeah, yeah. I think I had a similar experience with like mysticism. Like when I first heard about Kabbalah was in the context of like Western magic, um, like Agrippa and like Aleister Crowley and tarot cards and that kind of stuff. And it was this very, um, now I look at it as a very kind of colonial attitude of just like mixing and matching every single thing that together. And like this kind of perennial idea, like if you find the similarities between all the different stuff, you'll boil it down to the most essential. Once I found like Gershom Scholem and Moshe Adel and like Daniel Ma, and actually got found some authentic texts, I was like lost 100% all interest in all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I was like, this is so much more compelling to me. I'm not saying it's
Mhm.
more interesting inherently, but to me, I think I found the little kernel that I was actually into. And so and then I had a starting point from there. And that was after, because the other information's so much more accessible and readily available that I think a lot of people get lost there. And to me, it was so refreshing to find just something specific and just more well-grounded. And you can't talk about the Kabbalah. You can't even talk about the Zohar. You can talk about what the Zohar says in one place, but you can't talk about what the Kabbalah says about this or that. So
That famous adage, the more you study, the less you know. It's definitely true because everything within any tradition is so complex and multifaceted. But yeah, I do think there's a lot of people, and for people listening, what David is referring to is so Kabbalah for sure is a traditional Jewish mysticism that is multifaceted. And then I don't know when this starts to happen. I think 17th, 18th century, other religious traditions begin to explore it and appropriate it within Christianity and then within like naturalists or I don't even know what you would call it, but people not native to the Jewish world start to explore it and the spiritualists and stuff and they have their own Kabbalah that is taken off of the branch of the Jewish Kabbalah. I personally have no problem with that, but like you, I resonate much more with the stuff that's grounded and rooted in the tradition.
and so to bring it back to music, I feel like I had a similar experience with Klezmer. I heard it from the outside, mixed it with whatever I was into, and that was enough. But then once I found the real something closer to the core of it, it just resonated much more deeply with me and made me a lot more cautious about bringing in outside elements. Um, just
Yeah.
yeah, so
You
kind of
you
slowing
want to
down
you
a
want
little
to you
bit.
want to do it you want to do it with respect and in a way that's truly grounded it sounds like. Is that does that I don't know if you're a religious person at all, but are does that resonate with your experience as a Jew in the religious realm?
I'm not super observant. I like try to learn. I feel like the most I engage with Judaism is through the learning side.
Yes.
And I do consider that a very, I think, like Jewish thing. Even I have a friend who's like a Chabad rabbi, and Chabad is like the intellectual, like reaching the spiritual through the intellectual side of God. So I do relate to that. I don't practice that much, and it's mostly because I'm just feel like I don't have my life together enough to really observe
Right.
the Sabbath and all. Well, I always feel behind,
Yeah.
um, like ill prepared to do it all. But so I don't know where I stand religiously, but I do think it's super important that these things have been preserved.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do see a need for that to have some continuity into the past. I think there is a lot of like disconnection. Yeah, I think my attitudes about music are probably similar
Yeah.
to my attitude.
It's a weird, it's a strange time. It's a difficult time to be Jewish, and for an artist to be focusing on, for a musician to be focusing on this distinctly Jewish and very Jewish musical tradition at a time when it's so fraught and challenging to be a Jew. What has that been like to do such a deep dive into the Jewish arts at a moment when Jewishness is such a, I don't know, such a challenging identity to live out?
I really do feel when I'm feeling the music intensely, like other people pick up on it. And I love it when people who don't know anything about klezmer like really enjoy it or come up to me, or like younger people in particular. So I see it as maybe it's a little bit of a challenge, and it is funny because like I'm super into it and people on the outside don't know necessarily what that means. They're like, oh, does that mean he's like a Zionist? Does that mean he's like, where does he stand? And so I can see sometimes people get uncomfortable. So I don't know. And then, yeah, and there's certain things where you encounter weird things. Like I'll go play at like a little picnic and there's like armed security there. And you're like, whoa, this is weird. So I don't feel that. To me, it's just something I'm into and that I love. And I don't really think too much about it. But then I see it on the outside kind of reflected back at me. I'm like, oh, this is like an intense situation, like that people would feel the need to have armed security just because we're
Yeah.
listening to klezmer music in a public space. I'm like, wow, like it's intense. But yeah, it's not on the forefront of my mind, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the music's great. This is instrumental music, so it can mean anything to
Yeah.
anybody. That's a nice thing about it.
Really love what you're doing musically. I love the last album. We will put show notes up so people can connect to it. Yeah, tell me about a work that you, or an artist that you want to let people know about that you love right now.
Okay, so for this album, I'd say Ansky, Shlomo Rappaport. He was like my big inspiration. And I actually used some historical recordings from one of his ethnographic expeditions. So he was a Russian Jew. Like he grew up in the Pale of Settlement in a very Jewish kind of ghetto. And he got radicalized by the ideas of the day, communist ideas, and he went out to document the plight of the Russian proletariat. Anyways, he's a really complicated intellectual figure. He's very influenced by the kind of tumultuous intellectual movements of his day. But what happened to him eventually is he became this like westernized guy, and then he got the call of, oh, the people, like, oh, there are Jewish people, because he was obsessed with Russian folk tradition, and he realized, oh, there was a Jewish folk tradition. And at that time people were just realizing there was a Jewish folk tradition that was worth preserving because it was disappearing, I think was a big part. So I think he grew up thinking, like a lot of other people, that there wasn't really a Jewish culture, that Judaism was somehow this floating, almost like parasitic culture that was just this mismatch. So anyways, he's There's two things he's best known for. One thing is he started this major ethnographic expedition and wanted to create a Jewish art museum and to document the Jewish folk art. And he did it very extensively. And then up to World War One, and then he documented, like, it's called the destruction of Galatia, what was happening in this part of the world. But anyways, he wanted to revitalize the Jewish arts by preserving and the Jewish folk tradition. So he wasn't preserving it just for its own sake. The real purpose was creating a new Jewish national identity. And which was a beautiful idea, but what's so awesome about it is he made this play, the Dybbuk, that really did it. Nailed it on the head. And the Dybbuk to this day is like an all-time classic. Still really resonates with me and with people. He just did it beautifully. So I love that he was so passionate that he dedicated his life to preserving this stuff. But I'm so amazed that he actually, out of everybody, he just knocked it out of the park in terms of taking all this interesting folklore and then putting it in a modern context and creating this incredible classic of Jewish art.
Yeah, he was a giant, to be sure. So, yeah, go ahead.
So he was definitely a big inspiration for me. It's like, okay, so this old music it's not enough just to preserve it. You have to do something with it. That was like kind of he compelled me to try to push a little bit more.
Yeah. It's interesting that you love it and you love him because of this appreciation for the tradition and the innovation, but you yourself seem to be saying that with your last album, you're not looking to the innovation, at least yet.
The innovation is definitely there, but it's there. Like, I'll do stuff that there's only a couple people I know who even notice that I'm doing it. Yeah, and I think the sound of it is different than any other Klezmer record I've heard. And then the mixing source recordings with it, which I've never really heard done before. So there's little innovations, but yeah, I'm at a pretty cautious point. I'm treading lightly. Definitely not like what Ansky was doing. That's, to me, is like, he set the bar really high.
Maybe that's where you're headed, but that's not where you're there yet. I have so much respect for that. Okay. And then finally, David Rosman, what is the best Jewish food?
Well, I would say one thing I can't get here is just good corned beef that I miss. Just like a good holiday brisket is something that I really enjoy.
Do you make it?
I used to, but now I can't eat tomatoes anymore. So now I don't even know what to do.
Oh no!
I developed a tomato allergy. But yeah, that has always been my favorite. So yeah, now I don't even know where I'm at.
Yeah, I love a good brisket, but corned beef, you don't have to have tomatoes for corned beef. So maybe you should set your sights on that.
Yeah.
All right, David Rosman, that was a total pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and for your really interesting ideas about Jewish texts and Jewish music. And I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right.